So with the history deleted, then we can select all of the faces, and we'll just do a simple extrude, right? So if we click on extrude here, now the thing we want to do here, if we do thickness, if we adjust the thickness, that will work most places, but you can see there's some weirdness going on here. So instead of doing thickness, we can try to do local translate Z. And that should work a little better. I might want to go negative rather than positive. So I'll just actually type in a value here. Come on. So what this is doing, thickness is just using a common direction to push out. The local translate Z looks at the local normals pointing out from the surface and uses it as the axis of movement. So the axis of movement of this face would be different than the axis of movement of this face, and so on. And if we want to have a bit of a tighter edge, we can add a couple of divisions in here. Now you can see, because I went negative, that it's black now. That means the normals have been reversed. So I can just select this and go to Mesh Display and reverse the normals. So now we have vessels that have some thickness and a good cut edge. And if we wanted to sharpen up the cut edges, we could select and go to Insert Edge Loop. Oh, that's on the inside. But on the outside, we can add one right towards the edge, and you can see how it sharpens it up a little bit. So generally speaking, that's all you have to do for these vessels. Later on, we'll come back and talk about adding surface detail, texture, bump, and that kind of stuff. But for now, I just want to focus on modeling. Okay, so now let's look at completing the kidney. And so it's 20 to 2 now. So I'll just demo this for a while, and then when I'm done, I can answer questions. But if you guys have to work on your path, you can just work on that. So let me just hide this thing for now. So this will be new vessels. I haven't saved this for a while. Just want to make sure my incremental save is turned on. It is. Save the scene. And I'll hide this. Oh, so I guess I didn't add this to that layer. So if I created a layer and I forgot to add that thing, I can just go onto the layer, right click, and say Add Selected Object. And now it's on there. I can also select these curves, and I can add those. So I would say when you're working on something like this, don't delete those curves. Oops. The construction curves, I would say, just keep those things and put them on a display layer in case you had to go back and start from the beginning. At least you have your curves to start from. Okay, so here's the shell of, I'm trying to rebuild that kidney here. So I'm going to turn this back on. And so you can see that I'm building polygons to match the shape of this. So let me hide this too for a second. And I'll do that again. So there are two approaches I think you could probably take in modeling this kidney. And the first approach would be just to start with a cube. And this is called box modeling. So if you just create a simple cube and just add detail to it as you go. I'm going to go into my front view here. Now, normally I encourage you to model here in the middle of the world, but since our reference object is over here, I'm going to move it over here and start to model. So you can start with something simple like this, but I may want to arrange the cube a little bit so it matches the orientation of the kidney. So here in the top view, I can do that. I can rotate this a bit, maybe scale it out this way. And then I can start to tweak. So I want to try and match the shape as much as I can before I start to add resolution. So I'm trying to tighten it up over here. And I've also got to tighten it up over here a bit, but that means I don't have enough resolution to grab this. So here I need an edge loop now. So if I go into object mode, insert edge loop. Then I can add a little more detail, go to vertex mode, and just start to grab things and start to make the shape. And just jump back and forth. Obviously this is too short. And I can continue doing that. Insert an edge loop maybe here in the middle. So I may want to look at this in wireframe mode for now. It's a little tall. And again, you just want to keep trying to approximate the shape as much as you can with the geometry that you have before moving on to something else. Unfortunately, Maya doesn't have a way to hide part of a model, so like the rest of this model kind of gets in my way. I could duplicate this model, delete everything else except for this kidney. That would probably make my life a little bit easier. So I can continue doing this and adding edge loops. Another way to access the last tool that you used, of course, if you hit Y on the keyboard. Another way, if you hold down the space bar with the hotbox open, there's a recent commands menu set here, so it just lists all the things you've used recently, so that can be handy. I probably want one going along the edge here. I'm not going to do this for too long because it's a little boring to watch and you're not going to learn anything unless you just do it yourself. Oops. You want to look at this in smooth mode too to see how it's matching the shape, and you can pull out things here. So what's important here is that you start to manage the flow of the geometry. So for example, here in the kidney, the actual scan, you can see that the geometry goes like this. And, oh, hey, how's it going? And there may be a crease here where you want to insert some extra geometry. And if you want to do that, since our new model is not really flowing in that direction, we've got sort of a grid here, it'd be more difficult to add that type of resolution. So you'd have to model this to sort of start to match the shape. And with the kidney, the points are going to start to tend in towards the middle and towards the hilus here. And then we can do it this way. Just continue on and on, listening to podcasts while you do this. So if I go into 5 mode here, so you can see we're starting to approximate the shape. So you can keep doing that, and the only tools you really need to use for this are the insert edge loop and extrude. So you might, at some point, you'll get to where you want to create the hilus, and I'm doing this way too early. But let's say I wanted to push this in, then I could start to use my extrude tools here to do that. That's weird. Okay, so when something like that happens, it probably means if we go into 1 mode, I've selected some faces that are kind of turned down like that. So I need to maybe tidy this up a little bit before I carry on. Let's say I do something like this now. Select these faces. Extrude inward. G to do the extrude again. Then if I smooth it out, you can see we're starting to make that shape. So I'm being kind of sloppy about it, but these are all the things you have to consider when you do this. So the other way to do it, and probably it might seem a little more tedious in the beginning, but it would probably be a better way to approach it. But box modeling is a very common way to do this kind of modeling. But another way is to actually build polygon by polygon. But this is made up of lots of tiny polygons. We're going to make polygons about this size, so going like this. but we want them to stick exactly to the surface. So if we select this object and make it a non-reference object for a second, we can do something called snap to surface or make live. So with any object selected, remember we looked at the snapping tools up here before. This last one is whatever surface you have selected. If you click on this, it makes that surface live. So that means if you draw a curve or anything, it's going to stick to that surface at every point that you make. So the only two tools we'll use here are the create polygon tool and the append to polygon tool. If I can remember where they are. Create polygon. So I'll start here in the middle near the highless. So because this surface is live, when I click once, twice to define the vertices, and hit return, or in this case I'll hit Y to complete the function and then launch the same tool again, I could draw another polygon, but actually what I want to do is start appending to this polygon. So you can see what's happening here. A new polygon is forming. So if we go to Mesh Tools, Append to Polygon, then I can click on an edge, click away from here and hit Y to finish and launch the tool again. Y. So selecting one edge. And you'll notice that there's a big arrow on this edge. That means that my next point should be in this direction. If I try and do it the opposite way, like over here, you'll see and hit Y, and we just get a triangle. It's going to fold over itself. So we don't want to do that. So these polygons have directionality too. They go around in a certain direction. So you have to just be careful while you're doing this. So let's say I go all the way around, and you see the benefit of this here is that I'm directing the edge flow exactly the way I want to direct it. So if I want to continue this, I would finish this row going around, and I could just go on and append polygons this way if I want to and build out this way. But maybe another way to do this is actually to select some edges here. Just double click to select that row, and actually can extrude the edge. So if I go to my modeling tools and extrude, then I can just grab this to build out my geometry. Now these aren't sticking to the surface right now, so the next thing we'd have to do is just grab all those new points that were created and stick them to the surface. You'll notice that the middle of this is round. That means it's trying to slide on the surface. So if I grab the middle and just move it, it's going to pop to the surface of the live object. So you just have to go through and grab these and move them slightly, and they'll pop to the kidney surface.
What if you had it in
Oh my god, I don't know. I guess I think the average point will try and pop to the surface. So you really have to do one at a time. So that's a little bit tedious, but from working from scan data and rebuilding it this way is that you'll have a very accurate model of a real kidney, or whatever model you're working on, but you get ultimate control over the flow, and then you have a model you can do anything with. So this would probably be the way that I would go about doing this, and the process is called re-topologizing. So we've got a topology on this model, which is actually pretty clean. And if you want to turn off Make Live, you just have to click on that thing again. But the topology on here is good, but it's just too fine. We just want to have a simpler model that we can texture and shade and then control. And even if we had to animate it, it would be much easier to animate this low-res version that we can ultimately smooth and get something like this. So much simpler and much more controlled. So I'd like you guys, just for the next hour or so, to carry on working on this thing, and I'll come around and make sure everybody is up to scratch. So the two things we have to remember here, the new things we've learned is making the surface live, so you can snap points to the surface, using the create polygon tool, and use the append to polygon. And I would recommend using this method rather than the box modeling method. Okay, any questions about that? Is there anything you want me to go over again?
How would you create the nephrons inside?
The nephrons inside, if you want to do that, I would model those on their own. So, like I would probably actually make those using like a revolved curve to make this sort of calyces. Is that what you mean? Like going in there, or do you mean the like loop of Henle at that level?
No. Just the geometry that's inside of the extrude.
Oh, so if we go into X-ray mode here. So this kind of structure, since they are, let's see if we can find a good one to look at here. This would probably be best done if you wanted to do it very naturally like this, so not this sort of idealized pyramidal shaped structure, this sort of the tapered cone. You could just do a tapered sort of cone to build these out and attach them all together. But you could just start with a cube and start building up this and extruding out, planning to make it meet the hilus here in the middle. This would be kind of difficult to do with the build polygon by polygon method, so I would probably just either revolve around the sort of pyramid sort of shape, or the cone sort of shape, or just start with a cube and start extruding out that way. But it would be the normals, it depends which way you want to see. If you want to see the inner structure, then the normals would have to be reversed to point inward. Yeah. So you can see that this, if you just started extruding out from simple cubic shapes, you could match something like this pretty easily. You could even extract this and reduce the polygon count. If you select parts of a model, so let's say you want part of a model like this, you could go to Mesh and extract, or Edit Mesh, or Mesh Tools. It's in here somewhere. Somewhere. I'll extract here. So you can, if you selected those faces inside, you could extract these as a separate model. And you could simplify those inner structures and actually use them to rebuild too. So that's another thing you could do. You could go in and select the faces inside here, or you could duplicate this model, delete all the outer faces, and leave you just with the inner ones. Another way to select faces gradually, so let's say I selected these ones on the outside. If I want to grow my selection, I can shift right arrow, and it will grow along the surface. I could just keep going until I go around, delete there, and then you can be left with the inner structure here. And you could use this as a guide for rebuilding, either snapping polygons to the surface or just extruding out these sort of shapes. Now these are very rough approximations of the internal shape. It might not be suitable for what you're trying to illustrate, but then you could just extrude cubes out, faces from cubes out to make these internal structures here. Okay? Undo, get that back. Put this little cap back on. Okay, so just carry on with this and we'll see how it goes.